Welcome to Bible study. Today we're going to be looking at reading wisdom literature, but we're going to be looking at a little different literature than we have been, in that because we're not going to be looking so much at the Proverbs today. We're going to look at some wisdom psalms, at least one of them, and give a few ideas about how to read them. And so I always talk about living in the land of parallelism here. We're used to wisdom and talking about Solomon as being the great wisdom leader of the Old Testament. We have this wonderful image of him in this dream, being confronted by God, and God more or less telling him, "Ask me what you want," kind of like three wishes and a genie, right? But he's given. But Solomon asks wisely and asks for wisdom, and as a result, God gives him all those other things that he would have normally, maybe you might have thought that he would have asked for. Solomon goes on then to write a whole bunch of wisdom literature. We know that he wrote the Proverbs, is the piece that we've been studying so far. He also wrote this very interesting document called the Song of Songs, which is kind of love poetry. He then wrote another text called Ecclesiastes, which is a reflection on life, and oftentimes perceived of as a reflection on life from someone on the end of life. And as he's looking back over his long life and maybe having a few regrets. We have last year we studied the book of Job, which is another kind of literature, another kind of wisdom literature, because it really reflects on what do you do when life goes utterly haywire, when it is all crazy. But there's another place where we find wisdom literature, and that is in the Psalter. The picture here is of Solomon receiving the Queen of Sheba, as done by a 15th century artist who I don't know that I'd ever seen anybody from Sheba, and has some really interesting ideas of what Solomon might have looked like. We're going to look at those Psalms. We want to look at a number of them, and here's a list of what are commonly acknowledged to be the wisdom psalms in the book of Psalms. Now, I want you to notice something about this. They're spread throughout. They're just scattered in there. There's not just one here, a group of them, like a chapter. Okay, here's a bunch of wisdom psalms. Let's bunch all those together. No, they spread them out. And you have to kind of wonder, why did they do that? What was the point of sprinkling them through the Psalms? Because unlike the other Psalms, which oftentimes have a great deal of emotional content to them, these Psalms that speak about, oh, I was cast down into the pit, and I was near the waters, nearly went over my head, but the Lord rescued me, or where it says, there is a river that makes glad the city of God, and you have all this beautiful poetic language. The wisdom psalms are didactic. They're instructive. They're here to teach me something. It's interesting that they just sort of fall in there. Of course, the Psalms, as you know, have had an outsized impact upon the life of the people of God, not only the Old Testament people of God, but also the New Testament people of God. Music has a way of really getting a hold of a person, and the Psalms were always meant to be sung. We don't know much about the singing of the Psalms in the ancient times. That musical notation has been lost to us. And we don't know that the music we know is connected to the music of that time. There have been a lot of restorations and a lot of reforms of musical form and notation since then. Probably the biggest one that may have affected this would be the Gregorian reforms in the 6th century AD, when they standardized a whole bunch of things, but we don't know how things were before. At the time, usually music and notation and the way that you would learn music was by apprenticeship and learning from someone who would teach you directly. They didn't apparently have a musical notation system, which would allow us to pick up a piece of music that had been written 100, 200, 300 years ago and be able to play that on a piano today. They didn't have a means to do that. But of course, the New Testament church has been really affected by the fact that these psalms have continued to be sung inside monastic and other communities daily for nearly the last 2,000 years. We see that at the time of the Reformation, the reformers also really gravitated toward the psalms. Many of them had been monastics and had grown up singing these psalms in the choirs of the monastic orders. But even after the Reformation, we find people gathering together to sing these psalms, oftentimes in a 4-part harmony. And one of the great hymn writers of the Christian movement, Isaac Watts, is known for setting many of these psalms to metrical paraphrases. Things like "A mighty fortress is our God" is Luther's setting of Psalm 46, or "O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come" is the setting of Psalm 91. We're going to look at that first one, which is a wisdom psalm. It's interesting again, too, that the very introductory psalm for the whole book of Psalms is a wisdom psalm. We start with these wonderful words: "Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers." This is what you call a synthetic parallelism. It goes somewhere. This parallel is a parallel of change throughout the parallelism. So notice what that means. The best way to think about this is to think about it in terms of steps. You've got step 1, you have step 2, you have step 3. And there's motion. What do I mean? Well, look at those 3 words that I just highlighted: walking, standing, sitting. They're different activities. They're different things. What do we take from that? You walk not in the counsel of the wicked. You don't stand in the way of sinners. You don't sit in the seat of scoffers. Well, one way people have talked about this is to think about it this way. Walking is rather active. When you walk, you're participating in the evil. When you walk in the way of evil, you're actually doing it. Sitting or standing, on the other hand, is less active. We oftentimes talk about somebody just sort of standing by while someone else does the evil. You are not stopping it, but you are also not exactly picking up the stone and throwing it at somebody and hurting them. You're just standing there. And then sitting. Well, that's even less active. Does the sitting person perhaps engage in the evil work even less? Perhaps by really and truly doing nothing and not even sort of lending an emotional or moral support to the evil by standing there and watching it. No, you're not even getting out of your chair to be a part of it. That's one way to think about this. So as we talk about, blessed is the one who does not walk, does not stand, does not sit. would be a way of grading grading the participation level in the evil. But there's another way to look at it. The progression might go exactly in the opposite direction. If you imagine a royal court now, where you have a king, and you have all of these people who are the courtiers and all of these folk. Well, the servants are the ones who are walking around. And if this kingly court is engaged in evil, they are probably the ones least responsible for the wickedness that happens. They may be kind of engaged in the actual doing of it, but they are following orders. The counselors are the people who are standing there, and they are standing there advising the king, maybe giving him wicked advice. But the only one sitting in that picture is the king himself. And he is the one who is most responsible for it. But which one of those is it? Is it a descending level of participation in the evil, or is it an ascending level of responsibility for the evil? Is walking worse than standing, worse than sitting? Or is the one who's walking better off than the one who is sitting versus the one who's standing versus the one who is even sitting, and hence the king responsible for it all? I'm not sure. Some days I think it goes one way and the next day the other. And it really doesn't matter that much. The point is the same. There are different ways to be engaged in evil. And the psalmist is clear. It's really just best to avoid them all. The second verse of Psalm 1 is what's known as a simple parallel. But I don't want you to be lulled into complacency by this. They're not always all that simple. His delight is in the contrast to the way of the wicked, the standing, sitting, doing, walking evil in the first verse. Rather, blessed is the man who does this. His delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. Seems rather simple. This is called a simple parallel because it's taking two things that are the same and laying them side by side in the two lines. Line 1 is talking about the same thing as line 2. But as you look at it, it gets less simple. I want you to notice two things about this verse. First of all, it has a chiasmus in it. This is a technical term for reading this kind of parallelism. So a chiasmus is where you have kind of an X shape, the chia. The chi is the Greek word letter for X. Notice the order of the sentence flips. His delight is in the law. On the law, he meditates. So first you have the verb, then you have the law, and then you have the law, and then you have the verb. We kind of look at that and go, but people in the ancient world really thought this was finely tuned literature. They paid attention. And what's more, they oftentimes used this to highlight something. Notice, of course, the law is the same, the inner part of the chiasm. He delights in the law. On the law, he meditates. But what's on the outside of that, the first and the last element, those actually have a difference, don't they? There's a real difference between delight and meditate, and that's probably what he wants you to think about here. The person who is not who's not walking, sitting, or standing in these evil ways and on the seat of scoffers is doing something different. He is delighting and he is meditating on the law of the Lord. Delight and a constant meditation upon something really bring different things to mind, don't they? One of them is a lot more fun. But really, if you think about it, both of them are part of the righteous life. And the law of the Lord, this wisdom of God, this Torah of God, belongs to both the happy, delightful moments and to maybe those more anxious, meditative, and moments when we are lying in bed awake at night. And in both of those times, the law of the Lord is his guiding light, and he's thinking about those things. In verses 3 and 4, we get an antithetical parallel. Sometimes they just lay two things side by side, and they're not the same, they are the opposite. The wise man, the good man, the blessed man, is like a tree planted by streams of water. He yields his fruit in season, his leaf does not wither. All that he does prospers. The wicked, however, are not so. They are like the chaff that the wind drives away. When you have these antithetical parallels, when you're laying two things side by side, you really want to notice what is the difference. Well, of course, this one's pretty easy. The tree is solid. It is rooted. It is substantive. It is fruitful. And it doesn't die. Its leaf does not wither. Chaff, on the other hand, is the byproduct of growing grain. And in the ancient world, as you see this man here doing, the way you would separate the grain from the waste product, the straw, the chaff, the parts of the grain you couldn't of the stalk you couldn't eat, was you would come out into the threshing floor and you would take the grain in a fork like you see this fellow doing here, and you would throw it up in the air. The chaff is light, and a breeze would come and blow it away. But the grain is heavier, and so the wind couldn't catch it, and it would fall to the ground. And so this was the way they would separate chaff from grain. And the way that they did it was the wind helped them. It blew away the chaff, and it just sort of blew off into the fields. And there it was just left. It served no purpose. It didn't bear any fruit. It didn't prosper. It just simply was returned to the earth. It dies. But a tree lasts for generations and lives for years and years. So notice the difference is that the one who is blessed, who meditates on the law of God, who delights in it, that person is given solidity and substance. Where the wicked man, who is walking and sitting and standing in all of these ways of evil, he doesn't last. He has no stick-to-itiveness. Psalm 1 verses 5 and 6, on the other hand, gives us a simple a simple statement, a simple kind of parallelism. Antithetical again. You get this difference between the wicked and the righteous, but there's almost like a parallel within a parallel. It takes two little parallels of a simple parallel. The wicked won't stand in the judgment. The sinners will not be in the congregation of the righteous. But then that gets paralleled with verse 6. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. Here again we have this image of Solomon at that famous scene where the two women come and one of their children has died and they're supposed to figure out whose is the surviving child. This seems simple enough, but is it? Look very carefully at the final verse of this psalm. What's really happening there? Notice what you would expect to show up there. The wicked won't stand. The wicked man won't stand. The sinner is not going to be in the congregation of the righteous. But when you get to that last verse, notice it isn't the person anymore. The Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. Does that mean the wicked himself does not perish? His way perishes, but is this a word of grace for that person who maybe looks upon their life and sees themselves at some points walking, standing, sitting in those wrong places, who maybe looks back upon their life and sees it's a little more chaff-like than it is tree-like? I'm reminded as I see this of a passage that I have read often from Paul's letter to the Corinthians. According to the grace of God given to me, like a skilled master, I laid a foundation, and someone else is building on it. Let each one take care of how he builds, the way that he walks. No one can lay a foundation other than that which is laid, Jesus Christ. Everybody in this congregation has that, says Paul. You remember he's dealing with this troubled church in Corinth. Now, if anyone builds on the foundation with gold or silver or precious stones, this is the tree that stands. Or you can build with wood and hay and straw, chaff. Each one's work will become manifest, for the day will disclose it, that last day. It will be revealed by fire, and the fire will test what sort of work each one has done. If the work that anyone has built on the foundation survives, he'll receive a reward. If anyone's work is burned up, if it's chaff-like, he will suffer loss, it's true, though he himself will be saved, because he's built upon the foundation of Christ, but will only be through fire. The way of the wicked will perish, but the way of the righteous is known to God. You might want to read through some of those other wisdom psalms as you're thinking about this. If you want to talk more about it, we'll see you on Sunday. God bless you all. Bye-bye.